What's up everybody, I am Jeff with Toon Moose Design, and in today's video we're going to add a few upgrades to our Onefinity, kind of just go over the accessories you use and don't use, what dust collection we're running, do you even need a spindle, and stuff like that. So stick around, I think you're going to like this one. Alright, so we'll start out by installing the spindle. I'm not going to do like a super in-depth video on installing the spindle, we're just going to kind of glaze over it and just show you the basics of what goes into installing it. There's far better videos out there of people showing how to install them with a lot more detail, and I just didn't want to make a 40-minute video on that. So we're going to kind of condense that down. Same with the drag chain. We're just going to glaze over and just show you what all goes into it. But first off, do you need a spindle? Absolutely not. I've been running CNCs for 4 years now, and we just upgraded to the spindle, and you by no means need it. So why would you buy a spindle? So the water-cooled spindles are a lot quieter than the air-cooled spindles or routers. So that's another benefit. Also, you get the ER20 collet with this spindle, which is a far improvement over the regular collets you get with the Makita router. And then there's also a lot more power, but you do not need this in any way. I would say it's more of an upgrade than anything. So if it's not in your budget, don't worry about it. Just use the Makita router. I used it for years and they're fine. It's a luxury. You do not need to upgrade to a spindle. But if you have the money to burn, we'll talk about what spindles you should buy later. So this is how our CNCs look for quite a while now. It's on a Craig bench. The bench has been great. It's just kind of a mess, and we finally got time to install the spindle, so let's get that going. I've actually had this spindle for months. I just haven't had time to deal with it, so we're just gonna kind of get organized and just peel all this stuff out from underneath the bench. Since we do have a fancy laser, let's laser our logo on the front of the spindle mount. This is just anodized aluminum, so it should etch pretty easy. To be totally honest with you guys, I totally lasered my logo on there upside down the first time. Total idiot move. I was just excited to get it in there and pulled it out and it was upside down. So I just spray painted it, relasered it, and no one's gonna know. But all of you. So step one, remove the router. And you can just get spindles that are 60 millimeters that would just slide right in here and fit. You don't need to swap out the mount. For most people, the regular mount would be fine, but for whatever reason, I went with the giant one and we had to switch out the mount to an 80 millimeter mount. And again, Onefinity has a bunch of information and like a whole blog write-up on how to swap all this out, so we're just going to skip through it. We're not going to go super in detail, but I will show the process. And this part totally whooped my butt. It was so hard to get some of these little tiny Allen screw bolts out of here, and they were, I don't know if they were just seized or glued in or what, but it took me like an hour just to swap out this bracket. So kudos to Onefinity and their bolts not coming loose. And they're just tiny little Allen bolts, so just cranking on them just doesn't feel right. So I was just trying to be super careful not to strip any out. Luckily I didn't, but it was tough. But once you get the other spindle mount off, you literally slide the new one on and put it back together. So it was relatively an easy process. It just whooped my butt. Then you just put it all back together and make sure everything is as tight as you can get it, and remount the spindle, D-slider. And I'll actually do my best to find all the articles I used and like write-ups to do this, and I'll tag them all in the description so you guys can kind of shortcut your way to figure out how to do all this. And then for setting the actual spindle height, I kind of just guessed on it. This just kind of felt like the right position to me, but I honestly don't think it really matters. Just don't put it too low or too high, if that makes sense. And then this is definitely the hardest part. Again, I'm going to skim over all this, but you need to attach wires to this thing. This is the VFD or controller of the spindle, and you have to do a little bit of soldering. It wasn't too hard, but considering I didn't know what I was doing, it was a little intimidating, but we did get it, and it wasn't too awful in the end. I'll attach a few videos down below of others that have shared or created videos doing this. Also, if you want to spend more money, you can buy these pre-wired. There's also people in the Onefinity user group on Facebook that will charge a fee to do this for you, and then it just comes assembled and ready to go. And this is the soldering you have to do. You have to solder the plug that goes in the top of the spindle and just kind of attach all the wires to it, as it does not come this way. You might be able to buy these online. I have seen more expensive kits. This is just a cheaper one on Amazon. I still think the kit cost me like $400, but this is definitely the most intimidating part. And the instructions that come with this machine or this spindle were not helpful at all. And I actually really like this hose holder that Rowdy Roman made, so I actually combined this hose holder along with the Route 1 drag chain bracket. So I kind of had to do some finagling to get all that to work, but we ended up getting it, and I just drilled a couple holes in them to mount them together, and it worked out. And then the spindle kit came with these orange weird looking hoses, so I just bought my own. They just were higher quality, and I'd rather have them clear so I can actually see what's going on. And then I just tightened these down quite a bit, and then we're ready to move on to the reservoir to hold the fluid to actually cool the spindle. And then this is just a cheap tub. I got it like Home Depot or Amazon or whatever. It's actually a little too big, and this is also it's like a aquarium pump that came with it, and then you just attach the hoses to the pump, and then one that just goes through the lid to recycle it back into it. And this process was easy. I just drilled a couple holes and then just used some rubber grommets I got at the hardware store, and it was pretty painless. And then based on the recommendation from others, I use this antifreeze coolant since you don't have to change out the water as often then, and then this doesn't freeze, nor does it build up like mildew. As you can see, my container is a little too big, as I stated before, so I actually went and bought another jug of it, and it's just fine. And then I got this drag chain kit from Route 1 on Etsy. I'll tag all his stuff down below, along with Rowdy Roman and several other makers that 3D print parts for this machine. And then I just kind of followed the instructions and pieced it all together. I actually ended up modifying it, as you'll see shortly. Then I got the back part on relatively easy. There's not much to talk about here. It's just you're spending an hour or so just kind of feeding all this stuff through and clipping all the drag chain back together. And then we got to here and I had some issues. I had to make my own bracket just to kind of make it work with like all the hoses and everything, but this is just a piece of aluminum angle and I just drilled holes in it. It's nothing special. I attached it to my drag chain and that was pretty much it. Fed the wires through and just shot them out the back of the machine towards my reservoir. The same as before, you just kind of feed everything through and just kind of figure out where you want it to go. So I just made adjustments, moved the machine around, and kind of figured out the best place for the drag chain. Then I actually attached it to the table and drilled a hole to help ease the cords back through down under the machine. And I definitely made this hole far too big. It's just the only hole saw I had laying around in the shop. And this is just a kinetic switch. You'll see what this is for shortly. And I did clean underneath the machine as that was a total disaster. Just kind of cleaned up all the wires and the junk. Now we got everything installed. I actually have the spindle and the water pump hooked up to this little kinetic switch. So I turn this on and it'll turn on the VFD and the pump. I did run into some issues installing the VFD. I had to do some... Oh, there we go. I had to do some programming to get it to function right. It was only powering up halfway, so I was only getting half of my 24,000 RPMs. I'll attach a link to that article that helped me out to program this thing, as there's only a few buttons and it's quite confusing. So if you can get someone to do this for you, great. If not, you're just gonna have to do a bunch of reading and understand spindle talk. So that once it's on, all you do is push run, make sure it's going the right direction, and then this dial will actually adjust your RPMs. You can hook it up directly to the Onefinity. I didn't do all that yet. I will maybe do that in the future, but for now, I'm gonna control my RPMs with this little dial down here. So right now, this is at 12,000 RPMs. And right now, it's just over 18,000. As you can see, it's quite quiet compared to the router, the Makita router. This machine, or this spindle, goes up to 24,000 RPMs. Honestly, with a machine like this, you're not going to go over 18. I very rarely go over 16,000 RPMs, especially if I'm running V-bits. I'm usually hanging on around 12,000 RPMs. So this is the Huyang spindle. I got it on Amazon. I think it was like $400. This is the 110 volt version, the 2.2 kilowatt. I would not recommend this spindle. I bought it based on a recommendation of someone else. I didn't really look into it. I just ordered it. It sat underneath my CNC for like 6 months. And then I looked into installing it, and if you're gonna go this large with the spindle, go with the 220. It's like the same price. I'm honestly surprised they make this spindle in a 110 volt version. So if you can't justify doing 220, I would just go with the 60 millimeter spindle and the 1.5 kilowatt. That is more than enough for a machine like this. Another advantage to the ER20 collets that come with these is the collet it just grabs the bit a lot better, so the chance of bit slip is a lot lower. Also, you can run different bits. And again, on a machine like this, you're not going to be using half-inch end mills cruising at 800 inches per minute. It's just not going to happen. Realistically, the largest I would go for an end mill is like 3/8. I do use large surfacing bits and stuff like that, but it's a different ball game when you get into the half-inch upcuts and downcuts. I would not recommend that on this machine. So honestly, the 2.2 kilowatt for a machine like this is overkill. If I would do it again, I'd probably just go with the 1.5 kilowatt in 110 or 220, and it's more than enough. Because all you really want is the better collet, and the water cooled is just a quieter operation. But again, it's quieter, but the end mills are still very loud. When you're running a V-bit, you can barely hear it. I'll add footage of that later. But the end mills still screech and are loud. So, and if you're also running dust collection, it's not like this spindle is going to make your machine magically drastically quieter. Sure, the spindle itself is quieter, but the machine and the dust collection is still loud. Also, if you don't go with water cooled, there will be a fan, and it'll still be loud, but it'll still be not as loud as the Makita router. So I will link to several spindles below. I'm not an expert in spindles, but the Huyang is kind of like, I'm probably saying that wrong, but that seems to be the one that most of the guys are running. There is also more expensive versions that are like $800. These are like $400 or $500. So if you want to go this route, I'll link to them down below. Again, I would not recommend the 110 as it draws so many amps, and your basic circuit is just not meant to handle that many amps. So if you're going to go with the big one, go 220. The smaller ones should be just fine. And then I just needed a better fence situation, so I saw Broen would just use these PVC pipes, so I just made some quick circles in easel and just slammed them into the wasteboard. And then I know it's square since I made it square in the software, so this just worked pretty good. It took 10 minutes to carve these. This was my first carve with the spindle, and my spindle was actually spinning the wrong way, but I just switched 2 wires in the VFD and everything worked out fine. If I were to do this again, I'd probably put these a little bit closer, and then I just cut these to like 2 inches, and then I went about 0.4 into the wasteboard. I probably would have went a little further just to make them more sturdy, and then I just cut these on the miter saw. Then we're just going to give you a quick rundown of how I'm operating the machine and just show you guys what it's like to run the spindle. And then this is just a basic texture I'm doing for a upcoming project. I'll do a YouTube video on that, but you'll see what that's going to be later. Operation with the spindle versus the router is relatively the same. You just got to touch a few buttons on the VFD and you're pretty much good to go. And there's not a huge noticeable cut difference. Like, you're not going to be blown away. You're not going to gain an extra 200 inches per minute or nothing crazy. You might be able to go a little faster, you just have better control over your RPMs and more torque. In the future, I'll do a video on like all the clamp down methods I'm aware of, but honestly, most of the time, I just do the CA glue or just screws. It's the easy, and I haven't had it break free yet. Then you just turn the VFD on, set your RPMs, and then you're pretty much good to go. It does take a little bit to power up or like fully get to the RPMs, but you get used to it after a few tries. And as you can hear, the machine's still relatively loud. The carving through the wood is not a quiet process. You can hear a little bit of screeching, and once it gets to the end of this path, I actually lower the RPMs, and it actually reduces the screeching a little bit. So if your bits are real loud, try lowering your RPMs a little bit. Odds are most people are running their RPMs way faster than they should. So go back and listen to the beginning of this video and then listen to the machine now. It may not be that noticeable, but the screeching it cut it way down, and I just lowered the RPMs like 500. I think I ended up at like 13,000 RPMs here. And this texture was generated in VCarve Pro. This will be for the front of a door. If you want to follow along with this build, it'll be on Instagram on the Builders Challenge. I will do a YouTube video eventually.
And then this thing was just a big old silver bullet, and I tried to think of something to put on here that would be clever, and this is the best I could come up with. I just, for whatever reason, this popped in my head, and I originally tried googly eyes, but because of the curve of the spindle, they would not stick, so I just put the original flying tiger eyes on there. And here I'm just cutting an inlay plug. This was just something I was working on that day, and as you can see, it's quite quiet without the dust collection or any end mills running. So if you're running 3D carves or just V-bit type stuff, the machine will be drastically quieter. And then another thing to note here is you notice how the dust just kind of builds up. All them chips just kind of sit on the material. With a water-cooled spindle, you won't get that fan blowing down and shooting dust all over the place. So you may like it, you may not, but it's just another thing to note. They all just kind of sit there, so if you don't run dust collection, it'll just build up on your material. Now we'll just go over some accessories that I've been using lately.
So I got rid of the mount for the TV. I just wasn't a fan of the display. This kind of just, I think they fixed this issue, but I ended up buying a different one. So this is just like a bendy cord, and it just holds it, and it's just fine, and that's just how I run it. Also, another huge advantage, or huge simple upgrade, is these magnets. I got these magnets everywhere, but it controls all my random CNC stuff. I'll attach links to all this down below. And then I have more magnets over here, and they're great. They keep it organized. Got my pencil, got my picks. Then I use these little feeler gauges to help set my Z0. And then this is the dust collection I've been running. Just because it's a wall unit and it's easy to contain, this is just a 1 horsepower model. Rockler does make a large version like this that has plenty of power. I think it's like $600, which is why I don't have one, but this is just fine. A shop vac is also fine, but shop vacs are quite loud, but they do remove chips just fine. I also have a few Festool vacuums, or like Fiend makes them, quiet woodworking shop vacs, which them are great too, but those have filter bags in it, and you need to replace them filter bags all the time. So that's just something you need to think about, but this shop vac ordeal does just fine for me. And then I just run the standard Sucka dust boot. There's a few other options out there. There's this one. I wasn't a huge fan of this one, so I mostly just run the basic dust boot. If I'm recording, I don't run the dust boot. If I'm running V-bits, I don't run the dust boot. But like end mills or material removal, always run your dust boot. I also made a quick CNC bit user guide, so you guys can buy that on our website, and I'll probably put it on our file Etsy, but it's just like a basic breakdown of what the bits do, and the basic starting RPMs and cut depths and all stuff like that, because that's like the hardest part when you first start out, is figuring out how to run all the different bits. So that'll be available. It'll be a couple bucks, and it'll really fast track your success and give you a good starting point. Because when I started out running the DeWalt router on the X-Carve, I ran that thing on 6 forever until I figured out that RPMs matter, and you don't want to be running them that fast. Again, my typical RPM range is between 12,000 and 15,000. I would say that's most of the time where I'm living. It's a Hobbyist CNC machine. You can't expect this thing to go 400 inches per minute. It's just hard to get the proper chip loads and all that stuff with the smaller machines, as you'll start getting like chatter and stuff like that. And I'd rather just go a little slower and get a better quality of cut than save 3 minutes on a carve. My personal experience or preference, and that's just how I feel about it. I really like the drag chain. It really conceals everything, especially when I went with the water-cooled hoses. It's a lot to just be hanging off the back of the machine. So I would highly recommend a drag chain. This is from Route 1. I did have to make modifications to make it work for my setup, but I would recommend getting a drag chain if you want to, figure out how to do all this. I don't have much to say about it. It contains the wires. It makes it look nice. Not needed, but if you're interested, pick one up. I really think that's about it. I'm going to do more inlay videos. I'm also going to do like an inlay how-to. People were really interested in that. I do have a few videos coming up. I have a big table build video. I have like a shoe rack video for the builders challenge we got to do. And then I'll do probably a laser video, and then I'll probably do more CNC videos. I will do like the inlay videos as like filler, just because them are easy to like produce from a video standpoint. So I think that's it. If you guys have any questions, comment down below. I'll do my best to get to them. And check out that CNC bit guide. And I hope you all have a wonderful day.